The letter trembled in Jane Evans' hands as the stagecoach rattled over the rough terrain of Wyoming Territory. It was 1878, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a man whose words on paper promised safety, kindness, and a fresh start. A man who might help her forget the bruises that had only just faded from her skin. The coach jostled violently as it hit another rut in the trail, sending Jane's heart into her throat. She clutched her small valise closer, feeling the weight of her decision with each passing mile. Denver was now far behind her, and with it, the life she'd fled, the life with Frank, whose charm had turned to cruelty behind closed doors. "Sweetwater coming up, miss," the driver called from his perch. "Your stop's next." Jane straightened her plain blue travel dress and tucked a stray strand of chestnut hair back into her modest bun. At 22, she had already seen enough hardship to age her spirit, though her fair complexion still held the bloom of youth. The only evidence of her past was a wariness that shadowed her hazel eyes, a hesitance in her movements that betrayed how quickly she expected joy to transform into pain. The letter from Adam Owens described a cattle ranch outside Sweetwater, Wyoming, a modest spread with good grazing land and a solid 2-story house. He'd written that he needed a practical wife, someone who could help manage a home while he built his herd. He'd been forthright about the challenges of ranch life, but promised respect and partnership. Jane had responded, sending a daguerreotype and an honest letter about her skills as a seamstress and cook, mentioning only that she was leaving difficult circumstances in Denver. She hadn't told him about Frank, about the way he'd used his fists when the whiskey took hold, about how she'd finally gathered the courage to slip away in the night after he'd threatened her with worse than bruises. As the stagecoach rolled to a stop in the dusty main street of Sweetwater, Jane's mouth went dry. What if Adam Owens was just another Frank, with fists hidden behind pretty words? What if she'd traveled all this way only to find herself trapped again, this time in the wilderness with nowhere to run? "Miss Evans." A tall figure stepped forward as she descended from the coach. Jane looked up and up further to meet the gaze of a man in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His broad shoulders filled out a clean work shirt, and his stance was solid but not imposing. This must be Adam Owens. "Mr. Owens?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair that had been lightened by the sun. "Yes, madam. Welcome to Sweetwater." He didn't move to touch her, maintaining a respectful distance that Jane immediately noticed and appreciated. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, still clutching her valise like a shield. Adam smiled slightly, the expression softening his weathered features. "I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. I thought you might want to rest after your journey before." "Well, before we proceed with any arrangements." Jane's eyebrows rose in surprise. She had expected to be taken directly to his ranch, perhaps even to be married by the local preacher before sundown. That was often how these arrangements worked, quick, practical unions with little consideration for the woman's comfort or choice. "That's very considerate, Mr. Owens. Call me Adam, please." He signaled to a boy lounging nearby. "Jimmy, would you get Miss Evans' trunk from the coach?" As the boy scurried to comply, Adam continued, "I thought you might want some time to see the town, meet some folks. Maybe decide if Sweetwater and me are what you were expecting." He cleared his throat. This ain't exactly Philadelphia or Denver. Jane felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "I would appreciate that opportunity, Adam." They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, Adam careful to keep a proper distance. Jane took in the town with quick, assessing glances. Sweetwater wasn't large, a main street with the essential businesses: general store, blacksmith, 2 saloons, a small church, and what appeared to be a recently built schoolhouse. People moved with purpose, nodding greetings to Adam as they passed. "How long have you been in Sweetwater?" Jane asked, trying to settle the butterflies in her stomach. Coming on 8 years now. Came west after the war with not much more than my horse and saddle. Started working cattle for the Barton spread, saved every penny, and bought my own place 4 years back. Pride colored his voice. It's not the biggest ranch around, but it's growing steady. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a neat 2-story building with crisp, white curtains in the windows. The proprietress herself stood on the porch, a stout woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So, this is your mail-order bride, Adam Owens?" she called as they approached. Jane stiffened at the blunt description, but Adam's response was calm. "This is Miss Jane Evans from Denver, who's considering whether she'd like to stay in Sweetwater," he corrected gently. "Miss Evans, this is Mrs. Holloway, who makes the best apple pie in 3 territories and knows everything about everyone." Mrs. Holloway's scrutiny softened as she looked Jane over. "Well, come in then, miss. I've got your room ready upstairs, and there's hot water if you'd like to wash up before supper." Adam stepped back. "I'll come by tomorrow morning if that suits you, Miss Evans. Perhaps we could take a ride out to the ranch, so you can see it in daylight." Jane nodded, grateful for his understanding. "That would be fine, Mr. Owens, Adam. Thank you." After he'd tipped his hat and departed, Mrs. Holloway ushered Jane inside. The boarding house was clean and simply furnished, smelling of beeswax polish and baking bread. "He's a good man, Adam Owens," Mrs. Holloway said as she showed Jane to a small but comfortable room. "Quiet-like, keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. Built that ranch up from nothing." She paused, studying Jane's face. "Most girls come out here ready to marry the first day, desperate for security or running from something." Jane flinched slightly at the accuracy of the observation. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "You take your time, girl. Adam's giving you the choice, which is more than most men would do. That tells you something about him right there." Left alone in the room, Jane sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions washing over her in waves. Relief, uncertainty, hope, fear all tangled together. She unpacked her few belongings, including the small revolver she'd purchased in Denver. She tucked it under her pillow, a habit formed from months of living in fear. That evening in the boarding house dining room, she met 3 other residents, an elderly schoolteacher named Mr. Patterson, a young clerk from the mercantile, and a widow who helped Mrs. Holloway run the establishment. Their conversation was friendly but not intrusive, and Jane found herself relaxing slightly as she enjoyed her first proper meal in days. Later, as she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The shadows under her eyes spoke of more than just travel weariness. They were the lingering marks of nights spent awake, listening for angry footsteps, of days spent calculating how to avoid triggering rage. "You're safe tonight," she whispered to her reflection. "Just for tonight, you're safe." Morning brought sunshine streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. Jane dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a sage green cotton that brought out the flecks of gold in her eyes. She arranged her hair simply but neatly, wanting to appear presentable but practical. Adam arrived after breakfast, looking even more imposing in daylight, but somehow less threatening. Perhaps it was the careful way he held himself, the deliberate space he maintained between them, or the quiet respect in his voice when he spoke to Mrs. Holloway. "I've brought the buggy," he said. "Thought it might be more comfortable than horseback for seeing the ranch." The ride out of town gave Jane her first real look at the Wyoming landscape. The vastness of it stole her breath, rolling hills that stretched to distant mountains, grasslands dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers, and a sky so wide and blue it seemed impossible. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Different from anything I've known." Adam nodded, handling the horses with easy confidence. "Takes some getting used to. All this open space. Used to make me feel small at first, like I might just disappear into all that emptiness." He glanced at her. Now I can't imagine being hemmed in by buildings and people again. How far is your ranch? About 5 miles from town. Close enough to get supplies regular, far enough to have some peace. He paused. Mind if I ask what brought you west, Miss Evans? Your letters didn't say much about your circumstances in Denver. Jane tensed. I was working as a seamstress. The opportunities diminished. It wasn't a lie, precisely. After fleeing Frank, she'd had to leave her position at the dress shop. Adam seemed to sense her reluctance. Well, we're all entitled to our pasts. Out here, most folks are looking forward, not back. The Owens ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise, a modest but well-maintained house with several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and in the distance, the dark shapes of cattle grazing. A stream curled along one edge of the property, bordered by cottonwoods that provided rare shade. It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, Adam said, a note of apology in his voice. But the water's reliable, even in drought years, and I've got good grazing rights on the adjacent land. It looks... Jane searched for the right word. Solid. Like something built to last. Adam's expression brightened at that assessment. That's what I've aimed for. He showed her around the property, the barn with its stalls for horses and storage for winter feed, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that was more weeds than produce without a woman's touch, as he admitted ruefully. The house itself was simple but surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture, a large kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. I built the 2nd bedroom thinking someday. He trailed off, coloring slightly. Well, hoping for a family eventually. Jane felt her cheeks warm. Of course, that would be the expectation of marriage, children. The thought both frightened and stirred something deep within her. With Frank, the idea of being tied to him through a child had been terrifying. With Adam, she pushed the thought away. She barely knew this man. There's something else I should show you, Adam said, leading her back outside. Behind the house, partially obscured by a stand of trees, stood a small cabin. My first home here. It's just 1 room, but it's weathertight. I stay there now when I'm working late with the cattle and don't want to wake the house. He looked at her directly. If you decide to stay, but find you're not comfortable with our arrangement right away, you could have the house to yourself. I'd stay here until... well, until things changed. Jane stared at him, astonished by the consideration this implied. That's very thoughtful, but I know what people are going to think if you stay at the boarding house too long, Adam continued. This way, you have the protection of marriage, but still your own space. Your own door to lock if you wanted. The words hit Jane with unexpected force. Her own door to lock. Such a simple thing, but one that Frank had denied her, claiming a husband had the right to access his wife whenever he pleased. The memory of pounding on a locked bathroom door, of Frank's rage when he broke it down, flashed through her mind. Are you all right, Miss Evans? Adam's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. Jane realized she was trembling. Yes, I'm sorry. It's just... That's very unusual, what you're offering. Maybe. He shrugged. But it seems only fair. Marriage is a big step when folks don't know each other well. They returned to town in the afternoon, with Adam pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the area's settlement. Jane found herself watching him surreptitiously, the confident way he handled the horses, the respect with which he greeted passing riders, the thoughtfulness of his conversation. There was strength in him, certainly, but none of the simmering violence she'd learned to recognize in Frank. Back at Mrs. Holloway's, Adam helped her down from the buggy. I've got business to attend to tomorrow, he said, but perhaps the day after, we might speak again? You could let me know what you're thinking by then. Jane nodded, surprised by the disappointment she felt at not seeing him the next day. Yes, that would be fine. That evening, she sat on her bed, turning the revolver over in her hands. The weight of it had been a comfort on her journey, a promise that she would never again be powerless. But here in this room, with the memory of Adam's respectful distance fresh in her mind, it felt different somehow. She thought about Adam's offer marriage with her own space, her own locked door if she wanted it. It wasn't a romantic proposal, but it was honest, and it contained something she valued more than poetry or passion: choice. Adam was offering her choice. The next day, Jane explored Sweetwater on her own. She visited the general store, where she was quietly assessed by the shopkeeper's wife, the small church, where the young minister welcomed her warmly, and finally, the schoolhouse, where children's voices reciting multiplication tables drifted through the open windows. "Are you the lady who's come to marry Mr. Owens?" a young voice asked as Jane stood watching. She turned to find a girl of about 10, with braided blonde hair and a curious expression. "I haven't decided yet," Jane answered honestly. "Do you know Mr. Owens?" The girl nodded vigorously. "He helped my pa build our barn after the fire last winter. And when Billy Jenkins was picking on me, Mr. Owens told him that real men protect folks smaller than themselves. They don't hurt them." Her expression was solemn. "Billy doesn't pick on anyone anymore." Jane felt something warm unfurl in her chest. That was kind of Mr. Owens. "He's not like some of the other ranchers," the girl continued artlessly. "He doesn't get mean when he drinks, and Mrs. Holloway says he's too soft-hearted with his horses." Before Jane could respond, a woman called from the schoolhouse door. "Sarah Miller, recess is over." "Oh, hello there." The teacher approached, a woman perhaps a few years older than Jane, with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Evans." "I'm Clara Wilson, the schoolteacher." "I see you've met Sarah, our town crier." Sarah grinned unrepentantly before scampering back to the schoolhouse. "I hope she wasn't bothering you," Clara said. "We don't get many new faces in Sweetwater, especially young women, so you're quite the subject of interest." "She was telling me about Adam Owens," Jane admitted. Clara's eyes brightened with understanding.
"Ah, yes.
"The whole town knows you're considering his proposal." She smiled reassuringly at Jane's dismay. "Small towns have few secrets, I'm afraid. For what it's worth, Adam is well respected here. He's fair in his business dealings and generous when neighbors need help." She hesitated, then added, "My late husband wasn't."
Kind.
"I've learned to recognize the signs in other men. I've never seen those signs in Adam Owens." Jane swallowed hard, touched by the woman's perception and candor. "Thank you for telling me that." That night, Jane dreamed of Frank finding her, his face twisted with the familiar rage as he dragged her from Mrs. Holloway's. She woke gasping, her hand already reaching for the revolver under her pillow, before she realized where she was. The dream had felt so real that she got up to check that the door was locked before climbing back into bed, shivering despite the warm night. When Adam called the next morning, Jane was waiting in the boarding house parlor. She'd made her decision. "I'd like to accept your proposal," she said after they'd exchanged greetings. "But I would like to take you up on your offer about having my own space at first." Relief and pleasure crossed Adam's weathered face. "I'm glad to hear it, Miss Evans. I think we could build a good life together." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I got this in town yesterday. It's not fancy, but—" Inside was a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It was what I could afford," Adam said, a touch of embarrassment in his voice. "Maybe someday I can get you something finer." "It's lovely," Jane said sincerely, touched by the gesture. She hadn't expected a ring at all. Frank had never given her one, claiming it was an unnecessary expense. "The minister can marry us next Sunday, if that suits you," Adam continued. "Gives you time to be sure, and me time to get the house properly ready." The wedding was a simple affair, attended by most of the town out of curiosity as much as goodwill. Jane wore her best dress, pale blue, with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Mrs. Holloway had helped her arrange flowers in her hair. Adam looked almost transformed in his Sunday suit, his hair neatly combed, his expression solemn as they exchanged vows. "You may kiss the bride," the minister announced at the conclusion. Adam hesitated, then leaned forward to place the gentlest of kisses on Jane's cheek, his hand barely touching her elbow for support. The gesture, so considerate of her comfort, nearly undid Jane's composure. The small reception at the boarding house afterwards was cheerful, with Mrs. Holloway's famous apple pie and neighbors bringing small gifts for the new household. Jane found herself watching Adam as he spoke with the townspeople, the easy way he laughed with the blacksmith, his attentive listening to an elderly rancher's advice, his kindness to the children who darted between the adults. By late afternoon, they were in the buggy headed for the ranch, their ranch now, Jane reminded herself. Her trunk and valise were loaded in the back, along with several wedding gifts. Adam drove in comfortable silence, seeming to understand her need to process the enormity of the day. At the ranch, he helped her down from the buggy, then surprised her by handing her the reins. "Would you like to bring her to the barn? I'll get your things to the house." Jane took the reins hesitantly. "I'm not very experienced with horses." "No better time to learn than now. This is Daisy, and she's gentle as they come. Just walk her to the barn, and I'll be there in a minute to show you how to unhitch her." It was a small thing, but it made Jane feel included rather than decorative. By the time Adam joined her in the barn, she was already stroking Daisy's nose and murmuring to her. "You've got away with her already," Adam observed. "That's good. A ranch wife needs to be comfortable with the animals." Together they unhitched the buggy and settled Daisy with fresh hay and water. Adam showed Jane where everything was kept, the tack, the feed, the grooming supplies, explaining each item's purpose with patience. By the time they walked to the house, the sun was setting, painting the landscape in fiery golds and deep purples. Adam paused at the door, seeming uncertain for the first time that day. "I've put your things in the main bedroom," he said. "I'll stay in the cabin like we discussed." He handed her a key. "This is for the front door. The bedroom door has a lock too, though it hasn't been used much." Jane took the key, its weight solid and reassuring in her palm. "Thank you, Adam, for understanding." He nodded. "I've left some cold supper on the table. Thought you might want to settle in without fussing with cooking tonight." After he'd gone to the cabin, Jane explored what was now her home. The main bedroom was large and airy, with a sturdy bed covered in a handmade quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small dressing table with a mirror. Her trunk had been placed at the foot of the bed, but not opened, another small courtesy that touched her. She unpacked slowly, arranging her modest belongings in the drawers and hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe. The revolver she placed in the drawer of the bedside table, within reach, but out of sight. The next week established a routine. Adam would rise before dawn, do the morning chores, and have coffee ready by the time Jane came downstairs. They would eat breakfast together, discussing the day's tasks before Adam headed out to work with the cattle or tend to other ranch matters. Jane took over the household management, tackling the accumulated dust and disorder with determined energy. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the kitchen, in hanging curtains she'd sewn from fabric purchased in town, in planting herbs in the neglected garden. Each evening, Adam would return, wash up at the pump outside, and join her for the dinner she'd prepared. Their conversations gradually became more personal as Jane learned about his experiences in the war, his journey west, his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her work as a seamstress, her love of reading, though she still avoided any mention of Frank. At night, Adam would bid her a polite good night and retire to the cabin, leaving Jane alone in the house. She always locked both doors, the bedroom and the front door, but found herself relying on the revolver less and less as the days passed. One evening, about 2 weeks after the wedding, a summer storm rolled in unexpectedly. The rain came down in sheets, and lightning split the sky as Jane watched anxiously from the window. Adam had gone to check on a heifer that was close to calving, and should have been back hours ago. When he finally appeared, he was drenched to the skin and limping slightly. The creek was rising, he explained as Jane helped him remove his sodden coat. Had to take the long way around, and Rusty stepped in a hole. He's all right, just a bit lame. I walked the last mile. You're freezing, Jane said, noting how his hands trembled. You need to get warm before you catch your death. She built up the fire while Adam changed into dry clothes in the cabin, then made him sit close to the hearth with a cup of hot coffee laced with whiskey. His usually tanned face was pale with cold and exhaustion. The calf? She asked, bringing him a bowl of the stew she'd kept warm. Born healthy, despite the weather. Pretty little heifer. He ate hungrily, color gradually returning to his face. Sorry to worry you. Jane realized with a start that she had been worried, genuinely concerned for his safety, not just for what might happen to her if he didn't return. The recognition of this emotional shift unsettled her. It's too wet for you to go back to the cabin tonight, she said finally. You should take the bedroom. I can sleep down here by the fire. Adam shook his head firmly. I won't put you out of your bed. The sofa will do fine for me. The arrangement was awkward but manageable. Jane provided him with blankets and a pillow before retiring upstairs, locking the bedroom door more out of habit than fear. Through the floorboards, she could hear Adam moving around, banking the fire, settling on the sofa that was too short for his tall frame. Sleep eluded her as she listened to the storm and thought about the man downstairs, his consideration, his patience, his quiet strength. She was beginning to trust him, she realized. Not completely, not yet, but more than she'd trusted anyone since Frank first showed his true nature. The next morning, she found Adam already up and making coffee, his hair tousled from sleep, his expression slightly sheepish. I hope I didn't disturb your rest, he said. Not at all. Jane hesitated, then added, You don't have to stay in the cabin anymore, Adam. Not on my account. His eyes met hers, searching. Are you sure? She nodded, surprising herself with the certainty she felt.
Yes.
This is your home, too. That night, Adam moved his things into the second bedroom upstairs. Though they still maintained their separate spaces, the house felt different with both of them under the same roof, warmer somehow, more complete. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a deeper rhythm of shared life. Jane learned to ride Daisy, accompanying Adam on shorter journeys around the ranch. He taught her to shoot his rifle, just in case, and found that she already had surprisingly good aim. She didn't explain why. They attended church in town on Sundays, took supper with neighbors occasionally, and began to be seen as a unit, the Owenses, rather than Adam and his mail-order bride. Jane made friends with Clara Wilson and several other women, finding unexpected joy in the simple sociability of quilting bees and church socials. One hot July evening, they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Adam had been quiet all day, preoccupied with something Jane couldn't identify. Is everything all right? She asked finally. You seem troubled. Adam was silent for a long moment. I had a letter from a friend in Denver today. He mentioned something that concerned me. Jane felt her stomach tighten. Denver, where Frank was. He wrote that a man named Frank Blackwood has been asking about a woman fitting your description, saying his wife ran off, and he's looking to bring her home. The blood drained from Jane's face. Her hands began to shake so badly that she had to clasp them together. Adam watched her reaction with growing concern. Jane, is there something you need to tell me? The words poured out, then the story she'd kept locked inside for so long. How she'd met Frank when she was 19, how charming he'd been at first, how quickly the marriage had soured once they were alone. The first slap after she'd burned dinner, the escalating violence, the night he'd broken her arm and then apologized so convincingly that she believed it would never happen again. Until it did, worse each time. I wasn't widowed like I let people think, she finished, tears streaming down her face. I ran. I took what little money I had saved and I ran. He has no legal right to call me his wife anymore. I filed for divorce before I left, claiming abandonment and cruelty. But Frank doesn't believe in divorce. He thinks he owns me. Adam had gone very still during her recitation, his face hardening into lines she'd never seen before. For a terrible moment, Jane feared she'd finally seen the anger she'd been watching for since they met. Then he reached out, slowly and carefully, telegraphing his movements, and took her trembling hands in his. "No man owns another person," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Not a wife, not a servant, not anyone. And no man has the right to raise his hand to a woman, ever." His grip tightened slightly. "Jane, I swear to you, Frank Blackwood will never hurt you again. Not while I draw breath." The conviction in his voice broke something open inside Jane. She began to sob in earnest, years of fear and tension pouring out of her. Adam didn't pull her close or try to quiet her. He simply held her hands, a steady anchor, while the storm of emotion passed through her. When she finally quieted, he released her hands and passed her his handkerchief. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," she whispered. "I was afraid. I didn't know if I could trust any man again." "You have nothing to apologize for," Adam said firmly. "And you were right to be cautious. But Jane, I need you to know something." He waited until she looked at him. "I will never, ever strike you in anger. I would cut off my own hand first." In his eyes, Jane saw the truth of his words and something more, something warm and deep that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I believe you," she said softly. That night, for the first time, she didn't lock her bedroom door. The threat of Frank Blackwood cast a shadow over the following weeks. Adam was careful not to alarm Jane unduly, but he took precautions, asking friends in town to keep an eye out for strangers, making sure Jane was never alone at the ranch for long periods, teaching her more about handling the rifle and revolver. "Not that I expect trouble," he assured her, "but best to be prepared." Jane appreciated his approach, practical concern without suffocating protection. He didn't try to hide her away or make decisions for her, as Frank would have done. Instead, he included her in the planning, respecting her intelligence and agency. Despite the worry, or perhaps because of the way they faced it together, Jane and Adam grew closer. Their evening conversations on the porch became longer, more intimate. Sometimes their hands would meet, fingers intertwining naturally, as they talked about their hopes for the ranch, for the future. One night, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Adam turned to her with an expression she'd never seen before, vulnerable, almost shy. "Jane, I know our marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I want you to know." He paused, searching for words. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've made this place a home, not just a house. And he swallowed hard. "I find myself caring for you in a way I didn't expect." Jane's heart raced. "Adam, Before she could finish, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted. A rider was approaching fast from the direction of town. Adam was on his feet immediately, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he said, all tenderness gone from his voice, replaced by alert tension. The rider turned out to be Jimmy, the boy from town, now working as a message runner for the telegraph office. "Mr. Owens. Mrs. Owens. Got a telegram for you. Operator said it was urgent." Adam took the paper, unfolding it quickly. His expression darkened as he read. "Jimmy, ride back and tell Sheriff Davis I need to speak with him. Tonight, if possible." After the boy had galloped away, Adam handed the telegram to Jane. It was from his friend in Denver. "Blackwood left Denver. Stop, headed your way. Stop, be careful, stop." "He's coming," Jane whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Adam, I'm so sorry to bring this trouble to your door." "This is our home," Adam said firmly. "And you're my wife. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Sheriff Davis arrived an hour later, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So your wife's former husband is coming to make trouble," he summarized after Adam explained the situation, careful to emphasize that Jane had legally divorced Frank before leaving Denver. "We don't know for certain," Jane said, "but Frank is persistent and dangerous." The sheriff nodded. "I'll keep an eye out for strangers, and I've got the legal authority to prevent any breach of the peace. But out here, you folks are a good 30 minutes from help, even if someone rides hard." "We understand," Adam said. "We're just asking for your awareness, not your protection." After the sheriff departed, Adam checked all the doors and windows before joining Jane in the kitchen, where she was mechanically washing dishes, her mind clearly elsewhere. "We should consider leaving for a while," he suggested gently. "I have friends in Colorado Territory who would take us in until this blows over." Jane dried her hands slowly. "No," she said, resolution hardening her voice. "I've spent too long running from him, Adam. This is our home. I won't be chased away from it." Adam studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Then we prepare and we wait." The waiting was the hardest part. Every distant rider, every unexpected sound made Jane jump. She tried to maintain her normal routine, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, but anxiety was a constant companion. At night, she dreamed of Frank finding her, his hands around her throat, and would wake gasping, reaching instinctively for Adam beside her. Only he wasn't beside her. Despite their growing closeness, despite the almost declaration on the porch, they still maintained separate bedrooms. Jane began to regret this arrangement, longing for the comfort and security of Adam's presence through the long, anxious nights. A week passed with no sign of Frank. Then another. Adam began to hope that perhaps Blackwood had lost the trail, or given up the search. Jane was less optimistic. "He's patient when he wants something," she explained. "He'll wait until we let down our guard." The prediction proved tragically accurate. 10 days after the telegram arrived, Adam rode out at dawn to check on the herd, leaving Jane with the rifle and strict instructions to keep the doors locked until his return. It was their first significant separation since the warning had arrived. Jane went about her morning chores, trying to ignore the prickling sensation between her shoulder blades that made her check the windows every few minutes. By mid-morning, she was kneading bread dough with forceful strokes, hoping the physical activity would calm her nerves. The knock on the door froze her in place. "Hello? Anybody home?" A male voice called, not Adam's voice. Jane wiped her hands slowly, her gaze moving to the rifle propped by the back door. She moved toward it silently. "I'm looking for the Owens place," the voice continued. "Got a bit turned around, I think." Jane lifted the rifle, checking that it was loaded as Adam had shown her. The voice didn't sound like Frank's, but that meant nothing. Frank was clever enough to disguise his voice, to play the lost traveler. The doorknob rattled. "Hello? I can see the smoke from your chimney, madam. I know someone's home." Jane positioned herself to the side of the door, rifle raised. "State your business," she called, proud of how steady her voice sounded. There was a pause. "My name's Taylor, madam. John Taylor. I'm looking to buy some cattle. Heard Adam Owens might have stock to sell." It was a plausible story. Adam did occasionally sell stock to other ranchers. But something in the too smooth delivery made Jane's skin crawl. "Mr. Owens isn't here right now," she replied. "But he'll be back shortly. You're welcome to wait in the barn." Another pause. "It's mighty hot out here, madam. Perhaps I could trouble you for a drink of water?" "There's a pump by the barn," Jane said firmly. "Help yourself." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Then, suddenly, the door shook violently as someone slammed against it. Jane stifled a scream as the wood creaked but held. "Open the door, Jane." The pretense was gone from the voice, replaced by a cold fury that Jane recognized immediately.
"Frank."
"I know you're in there. You think you can hide from me forever? You're my wife. I'm not your wife anymore, Frank, she called back, hands tightening on the rifle. I divorced you. Legally. Now go away before my husband returns. Frank's laugh was ugly. Husband? You mean the rancher? He can't protect you from me, Jane. No one can. Another slam against the door made the hinges groan. Jane aimed the rifle at the center of the door, remembering Adam's instructions. Wait until you have a clear shot. Aim for the center of the body. Don't hesitate. The third impact splintered the doorframe. One more would break it open. Jane steadied her breathing, finger moving to the trigger.
But the fourth impact never came.
Instead, there was a shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the ground hard. Get away from my house. Adam's voice, harsh with anger. Jane rushed to the window to see Adam standing over a fallen man, his fists clenched, his face set in lines of cold fury. Frank Blackwood was exactly as Jane remembered, medium height, well-dressed, with the handsome features that had once charmed her. But there was nothing charming about him now as he scrambled to his feet, face contorted with rage. This is between me and my wife, Frank snarled, reaching inside his coat. She's not your wife, Adam said evenly, and you're trespassing on my property. Jane saw the glint of metal as Frank withdrew a revolver. Without thinking, she threw open the door, rifle raised. Frank, don't. Both men turned at her voice. In that split second of distraction, Frank aimed at Adam and fired. The shot went wide as Adam lunged forward, tackling Frank to the ground. The gun went flying as the two men grappled in the dust, each fighting for dominance. Frank was smaller but wiry, fueled by obsession and hate. Adam had the advantage of size and strength, but Jane could see he was trying to subdue rather than seriously harm his opponent. Frank had no such compunction. He landed a vicious blow to Adam's jaw, then scrambled for the fallen revolver. Jane raised her rifle, but the men were too entangled for a clear shot. Jane, get back inside, Adam shouted, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek as he struggled to pin Frank down. Instead, Jane circled around, rifle steady, waiting for her chance. When Frank broke free and lunged for his gun, she stepped forward. Don't move, Frank, she said, her voice ringing with authority she'd never shown him before. I will shoot you if I have to. Frank froze, then slowly turned to face her, his expression changing from rage to the cajoling smile she remembered all too well. Jane, darling, put the gun down. You know you don't want to hurt me. We belong together, you and me. This farmer can't give you what I can. What you gave me were bruises and broken bones, Jane replied, the rifle unwavering. What Adam gives me is respect and safety. Now back away from the gun and leave our property. Frank's smile twisted into something ugly. You've gotten bold, haven't you? That won't last long once I get you home. She is home, Adam said, rising to his feet. His lip was split, and he would have a spectacular black eye tomorrow, but his stance was solid. And she's made her choice. It's not you. For a long moment, the three of them stood in a tense tableau, Jane with the rifle, Adam bleeding but unbowed, Frank calculating his options. Then Frank's hand darted toward his fallen revolver. Jane fired. The shot kicked up dirt inches from Frank's reaching fingers. He jerked back, eyes wide with shock. In that moment, Adam was on him, delivering a single, powerful blow that left Frank sprawled unconscious in the dust. Are you all right? Adam and Jane asked simultaneously, then looked at each other in a moment of shared relief that bordered on hysteria. You're bleeding, Jane said, lowering the rifle with trembling hands. And you're the bravest woman I've ever known, Adam replied, his eyes filled with admiration and something deeper that made Jane's heart race. They tied Frank securely and loaded him into the wagon. Adam drove to town while Jane followed on horseback, unwilling to let either man out of her sight. The sheriff was suitably impressed by their citizen's arrest, especially when Adam produced papers from Jane's lawyer in Denver confirming the divorce. "I'll hold him for threatening you with a deadly weapon," Sheriff Davis said. "When the circuit judge comes through next week, we'll see about further charges. In the meantime, Mr. Blackwood will be taking a nice long stagecoach ride back to Denver with papers ordering him to stay away from you both." The journey back to the ranch was quiet, both Jane and Adam processing the day's events. The adrenaline had faded, leaving Jane shaky and Adam clearly in pain from his injuries, though he tried to hide it. At home, Jane insisted on tending to Adam's cuts and bruises. Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the blood from his face, applied witch hazel to the swelling around his eye, and carefully checked for more serious injuries. "You could have been killed," she said softly, her voice catching, "if his aim had been better." Adam captured her hands in his. "But it wasn't." "And you were magnificent, Jane. Standing there with that rifle, not backing down an inch." His eyes, one already swelling shut, held hers intently. "I've never seen anything more beautiful in my life." Something shifted between them in that moment, a final barrier falling away, a recognition of feelings too strong to deny any longer. Jane leaned forward hesitantly, then with growing confidence, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, mindful of his split lip, but deepened as Adam responded with a hunger that matched her own. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Jane felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with fear or danger, and everything to do with homecoming. When they finally parted, breathless and a little dazed, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months," he confessed. "But I was afraid of pushing you too fast." Jane smiled, feeling freer than she had in years. "I think we've both been too careful," she said, running her fingers along the strong line of his jaw. "But I'm not afraid anymore, Adam. Not of you. Never of you." That night, Jane moved her belongings into the main bedroom, their bedroom now. As they lay together in the darkness, Adam's strong arm around her waist, his heartbeat steady against her back, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come west as a frightened woman, running from violence, hoping merely for safety. What she'd found instead was Adam, a man whose strength was matched by his gentleness, whose patience had allowed her to heal, whose love had shown her that she deserved more than just the absence of fear. She deserved joy. "What are you thinking?" Adam murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Jane turned in his arms to face him, tracing the contours of his face with her fingertips. "I'm thinking that sometimes the things we run from lead us to exactly where we need to be." Adam smiled, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his split lip. "And are you where you need to be, Jane Owens?" "Yes," she said simply, the truth of it filling her with quiet certainty. "I'm exactly where I need to be." 3 years later, Jane sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Adam teaching their 2-year-old son, Andrew, how to pet a new foal. The little boy's delighted laughter floated across the yard as the foal's velvet nose tickled his palm. The ranch had prospered, growing from Adam's initial modest spread to one of the more successful operations in the area. They'd added a barn, expanded the house to include a proper dining room and another bedroom, and increased the herd substantially. Jane had started a small side business selling preserves and baked goods in town, building a reputation for quality that brought customers from as far as Sweetwater. Frank Blackwood had never returned. The circuit judge had issued a restraining order, and according to Adam's Denver friend, Frank had eventually moved east to St. Louis, apparently having finally accepted that Jane was lost to him. The nightmares had faded over time. Jane no longer kept the revolver under her pillow, no longer startled at unexpected noises, no longer flinched when Adam raised his hand to touch her face. The woman who had arrived in Wyoming 3 years ago, bruised in body and spirit, expecting the worst from life, and men would hardly recognize the Jane Owens of today. As if sensing her thoughts, Adam looked up from his lesson with Andrew and smiled at her across the yard, a smile full of love and pride and the quiet joy that characterized their life together. Jane returned the smile, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach where their second child was just beginning to make itself known. She had come west looking for safety, for a life without fear. What she'd found was so much more: a partner who valued her strength as well as her gentleness, a home built on mutual respect, a love that had grown slowly and steadily from cautious friendship to passionate commitment. And as the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in glory behind them, Jane knew with absolute certainty that she would never again walk in fear, not with Adam beside her, not in this place that had become truly home.